It's my first book for adults, but it isn't my first book in general. I've written 3 other middle fiction books. You know what? I have to say, Unbury the Dead is a much shorter title, which is much easier to remember than my kids' books, which have much longer titles. Hi, everybody. My name's Fiona Hardy, and I'm the author of Unbury the Dead, which is out now through Affirm Press. Unbury the Dead is the story of 2 problem solvers, Teddy and Alice. They essentially do a lot of different things. Sometimes they are private detectives, sometimes they are drivers, hearse drivers, sometimes they solve problems in a lot of different types of ways. At the start of Unbury the Dead, they've got 2 different jobs. They usually work together. Alice is driving a hearse with the body of Australia's richest man to an undisclosed location in the regional Victoria, before anybody else in Australia finds out what's happening. Whereas Teddy is in suburban Melbourne trying to find a missing person. And about halfway through the book, their 2 cases kind of violently collide, and then they have to spend the rest of the book trying to figure out what happened and to solve some more problems that they've created. The story of Teddy and Alice started with a twist that I came up with many years ago that didn't end up in the story at all. I had come up with this idea and I thought, this is brilliant, I'm so clever. And then I never actually managed to write the story that solved the problem that I'd created for myself. But in the meantime, I'd created Teddy and Alice, these 2 characters. So they're in their late 20s. They've been friends for about 5 years. Teddy has worked in the problem-solving industry for a very long time, doing petty crimes along with her father, whereas Alice had come quite recently to the business. I created their relationship and their friendship, and it really grew. And while they couldn't solve this plot that I had tried to contrive for them, I had built them into such amazing characters that I felt so close to that I was like, I'll give them a different issue. I'll come up with a whole different story. And then eventually worked through trying to find another story, landed on the plot of Unbury the Dead, started with a short story that I was writing about Alice driving a hearse and expanded from there. And that was basically how Unbury the Dead started. So not with anything that actually is in the book now, but a whole different plot line that built and changed into Unbury the Dead years and years later. So Unbury the Dead as a crime thriller is for all lovers of crimes and thrillers, with a kind of younger 2 protagonists. When I say younger, they are in their late 20s, but in the crime genre, which is a genre that I really adore in all its manifestations, there's often older protagonists. And that is kind of logical, like a logistical thing where you need someone with a lot of training in the industry. You've had, detectives or often like retired or cranky divorced police officers who, are drinking too much and stuff like that. That's often older. So I kind of wanted to have some characters that were a little bit younger, like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I remember when that came out and Elizabeth Salander was in her 20s, and that felt very unexpected as a book that I was reading. And so while that wasn't really a basis for what I was doing, that was kind of what I was thinking when I was writing Teddy and Alice, that it was good to have people who are a variety of ages. I'm no longer in my 20s, unfortunately, but it was fun to write about them. It's my first book for adults, but it isn't my first book in general. I've written 3 other middle fiction books. You know what? I have to say, Unbury the Dead is a much shorter title, which is much easier to remember than my kids' books, which have much longer titles. How to Make a Movie in 12 Days, How to Write the Soundtrack to Your Life, and How to Tackle Your Dreams. I've also written a few educational titles which aren't available in bookshops in general, but your child may find in their kind of reading box at school as well. I would love to be a full-time writer one day, of course. It is the dream of everybody who is working in the industry. But I have to say I'm pretty lucky because my part-time job while I am also working as a writer is in a bookshop as well. And bookshops are such great places, as I know, and we all support each other. So I love coming to Leaf and I love going to visit other bookshops as well. But I do work in a bookshop, and it's a really amazing industry to be in, an amazing job to have because you get to learn so much. And of course, the more you read, the more you learn how to be a writer. You get to take in a lot of different writing styles. And because you work in a bookshop, as you would know, we kind of get a lot of reading copies. We get a lot of different things. And so as a reader, when you go into a bookshop, you might just go straight to the section that you love and only look through those books. But as a bookseller, you have to know quite a broad range of things. And so you're often picking up and looking through a lot of different books. And so it helps me to learn a lot about writing when I am taking in all of those different styles. So as a writing routine, it actually changes, and it keeps changing over time. For a long time, I was going into cafes. Actually, I would say if we take it back to the start of this idea, my daughter was quite young. I would mostly drop her off at kinder and do a bit of work in the hour and a half that she was at kinder at a cafe nearby. or otherwise I would be working at night. As she has gotten older and she's gone to school and become a little bit more independent, and I've been able to carve out my own time, I now mostly work from home. I did go through a very long spate of working in cafes until I realised that perhaps I didn't have the income to balance the whole going into a cafe every day and buying myself breakfast and justifying buying lots of food meant that I could stay in a cafe for hours on end. So when at home I could just make myself a piece of toast for free or for just cents. So I have gone back to just exclusively working at home. I also fit it in around my daughter's sports. I take my laptop with her when I pick her up from things. So I kind of try and take it with me. There's a solid 3 days a week where I work from home and otherwise at her sports. And then there's 2 days where I focus mostly on my selling job and try to give my brain a little bit of a break. I am more of a morning person when it comes to waking up, but I do find working late at night can be something about the mood you can really create, darkness and holding yourself in that desk. And you can really isolate yourself and focus entirely on your screen. And so I work with a laptop. I do have a notepad with me at all times, just in case I have ideas, because I always have ideas coming through my mind. Okay, here's my lucky dip question. Are you a cat or dog person or neither? So I grew up a dog person. I always thought that they were the best companions for writing because I've been writing ever since I was a little kid. And they would come and sit on my bed while I was, actually handwriting at that point as a kid because I didn't have laptops when I was a child. And I do remember sitting at my computer in the lounge room and the dogs coming and sitting around my feet. But since now we are apartment people, I am now a cat person with my partner. And she, mostly ignores me, to be honest, in the kind of general writing capacity. But it is good to have a cat around because they, require not much in the way of attention. But when you give it to them, it's fun. Though sometimes she doesn't want my attention either. But a cat person, I think, for sure now. So I think the role of writing and reading, writing and writers in 2025 is a really important one because in this age of a lot of stressful news and a lot going on in the world, we always need to hear the points of view from the people who live in these worlds. And we're not always hearing that from news. From news, we're hearing from local journalists talking about exterior stories. But if you can get the actual stories written by people who live in these places that we're talking about and what's really happening, it can be really vital and important for those people to have opportunities to write and for us to have the opportunities to read true, real stories and full stories so we get full lives of these people rather than just going, there's a news flash about something that's happening in any part of the world where horrible things are happening. It would be good to know a full story, a full life, and the lives of people around them and things like that as well. And it's also, as a counter to that, a place to really put ourselves in a different type of mindset when we're getting pretty dark in the way of thinking about news and everything, to actually read something that is completely different and just think, okay, here's a whole different world that is fun and that we're able to read and, refresh ourselves for the new day and to be able to do anything if we can. It's interesting, actually, because as a bookseller, like I said, you need to know so much in so many different genres. Sometimes you can get a bit in your own head about forcing yourself to read things and focusing on a genre. For a long time, I was reviewing crime books for the newsletter in my bookshop, which was why I think I started reading and then writing so much crime. And when I was reading so much of it, it was both wonderful because I felt like a real expert in the field, but I got a little bit burnt out on it because some of them are pretty dark, some of them are pretty depressing. And I realized after a while I needed to take a little break from that and focus on some other books as well. And it was interesting coming away from that and going, what is it that I like when I'm not just reading one genre? And always peppering that with other books so that I could stay across what was popular in books as well. And I've realized that as it has always in my life changed. I went through a big focus on adventure nonfiction. So I loved reading people climbing mountains and going on adventures. I guess maybe that was a post-lockdown thing where I was feeling quite closed in. I always love reading kids' books. I think that they're fantastic and delightful, and they tell really good stories in a really compact amount of time. I'm reading Orbital at the moment by Samantha Harvey, but because it's requiring so much concentration, it's taken me such a long time for such a very, very tiny book. So I've little small doses on that one. But of course, I still just love reading crime, which I always have. That's a really good question, thinking about the first author that maybe got me started on writing or reading. I was always a big reader as a kid. My family encouraged it, but I think they didn't expect to have someone like me who was so voracious about it all. And so I still remember, I still have my first favourite book, which was Go Dog Go by the Dr. Seuss Peter Eastman book, which I think inspired in me the idea that you could tell so much stories within a limited amount of space. And I would go back to it and just find new things in this very short story that I really loved. I've never really been able to figure out exactly how he got that because it's only about, 25 words long. So as opposed to the 90,000 words that my book is, I do remember that being a huge enjoyment for me, and consistently reading throughout my whole childhood. I really liked the kind of Judy Blume. That was a big part of my life. That Paula Danziger was an author that was around at the same time, and you can't really find her books around now, but she was another one of those true contemporary life stories that I guess I was emulating in my kids' books, and that really, really spoke to me. There are all these kids are having lives everywhere that are a little bit similar to mine and a little bit different. Um, and I still remember the book Tully by Paulina Simons. Tully is quite hard to find, but Paulina Simons' other books are still very readily available. And the first time I read that book, it was another story of a young woman, and she was like maybe the first unreliable narrator that I had read when I think about it, where people loved her, but she wasn't a perfect person. And the story was a very in-depth telling of her life. And I think maybe that sparked something in me that I could write people that weren't necessarily just either me, because I was a teenager at the time, I was writing stories about other teenagers, but very similar, or people that were perfect, because maybe that's what I hope to be, but actually a good story could be told by someone who wasn't perfect after all. So I'm a person who's never really stopped having ideas or writing. I'm not saying that they're all good ideas or it's all good writing, but I'm always going. I've always got ideas written down. I've got a whole swathe of them, and I am always working on a few things at a time. I don't like to stop, because then, you might get a little bit too much in your own head, especially this is being recorded during the release week for Unbury the Dead. And at this point, it could be very easy to go, oh, this is all exciting and happening, and I'm just going to bask in it. But then, because you don't really find anything out about what happens with your sales until much later on, you just have to kind of keep going. So Yes, so always working on a few things. So I'm working on further stories for Teddy and Alice. I'm not sure if they'll go anywhere, but I've got two different plots that I'm working on basically at the same time to see which one I like more. I've written a couple of short stories about them as well, one which won a Scarlet Stiletto Best Thriller Prize. And also have written another middle fiction book, which I'm still working on as well. Who knows if that one will go anywhere. When I go on this particular writer's retreat with some friends of mine, I'm working on a whole separate literary fiction book as well that I only work on during that time. And then there's all the other ideas that sit there until, I guess, some magical time in the future in which I'm not writing anything else and will find time for them. So there's always something. But you never know if it's going to go anywhere or not. But that's okay. It's just fun to write. Thank you. I've had a great time. It's always lovely to be here.